So this is AsIAM's first community webinar of the year, starting off with autism and languages, focusing on multilingualism and fostering interest in second languages, or making sure that autistic people have the same access to their native languages when living in Ireland. Our speakers are Francesca La Morgia from Mother Tongues, who's also a researcher and lecturer at so many universities. I didn't honestly keep track. Um, and Bérengère Digard, who is a researcher at the University of Edinburgh, who did her doctoral thesis on autism and bilingualism. So we're going to start off with Francesca telling us a little bit about the work that Mother Tongues do in Ireland. And then we will go into Bérengère's research. And then at the end, we will have time for a Q&A. Any questions you have, you can pop them in the chat or in the Q&A box, and I'll keep track of those. And I think we're just going to pass over to Francesca and get started, if that's okay.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Francesca La Morgia. I'm the founder and director of Mother Tongues. And I'm really delighted that we were able to organize such an event with AsIAm, as these are two organizations based in Ireland that really advocate for the rights of everyone, for the rights of children, and for, in this case tonight, for some concepts that we'll discuss, which are considered to some extent new, such as you can be autistic and bilingual, multilingual. And I suppose, as was mentioned earlier, as a researcher, I always found the area of obviously language development and bilingualism really interesting. But equally, I felt over the years that there were so many questions and doubts that I felt that there was a need in Ireland for an organization such as Mother Tongues that would raise awareness of the importance of retaining all languages, especially for me on a personal level. I felt it was very important that families felt confident that they could pass on their languages, no matter what these languages were, to the next generation. And so tonight I'm not going to speak a huge amount. I wanted to just run you through what Mother Tongues does and kind of why it exists, even just to set the scene for what's going to be the core piece that Bérengère is going to talk about. I'll quickly share my screen so that I have a presentation. Okay, that is it. And right. So the goal of Mother Tongues is to inspire everyone in Ireland to be open to linguistic and cultural diversity. We know that linguistic and cultural diversity exist in Ireland, and they're part of our culture. They're part of the lives of people. They're very much part of the lives of young children. And we tend to work really primarily with children in their earliest part of life. And ultimately, what we envision is an Ireland where everyone is positive about linguistic and cultural diversity, and where everybody understands that bilingualism, plurilingualism, our values are really important for people's lives, and they're very important for the country, and that no one is discriminated against because of their linguistic background. And just to give you a sense, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the fact that Polish is the most widely spoken language that didn't originate in Ireland. Okay, Ireland is a country with 3 official languages, which are English, Irish, and Irish Sign Language, but there are more than 120,000 people who speak Polish, and that's followed by Romanian, French, and Spanish in that order, Portuguese and Lithuanian. But according to the latest census, there are also, these are the languages you see that have between 10,000 and 30,000 speakers. You see that there's a huge amount of speakers, but also a very interesting range of languages. And so those top languages are followed by German, Chinese, Malayalam, Arabic, Russian, Italian, Urdu, and so on. So there's plenty of information on this in the census if you want to look more deeply into it. But that kind of gives us a picture of the fact that you can imagine in every preschool, in every primary school, secondary school, there will be children and young people who speak more than one language, and obviously more than two, because many of them use Irish. But the reason why mother tongues exist is that while this is the reality for a lot of people, in a lot of cases, bilingualism can be seen as a burden, as something that needs to be overcome. It can be seen, or people might be told that it's not the best choice for them. And so, for example, we know that more than 1 in 5, or more or less 1 in 5 children in Ireland can become bilingual, at least, so able to speak two languages or communicate and interact in two languages. But parents are still sometimes told not to speak their mother tongue or not to introduce additional languages. So sometimes to prioritize English or to prioritize the language of schooling, so that children, and then there's lots of excuses. I'm not going to list them all because I don't really like them, but that's one thing that happens. People are told it's not a good idea. Still, less and less, obviously, over time, things have been improving. Of course, there's a lot more knowledge about languages. There's a lot more knowledge about bilingualism, but definitely we know, having spoken to hundreds of parents and also having met families in the bigger picture, families with grandparents and grandchildren, that sometimes children can't speak to their grandparents because for a certain period of their life, the parents were told, well, don't speak your language. And suddenly those children maybe missed out on a window of opportunity of 5 or 6 or 10 years of their lives where they disconnected from that language. We also know from other reports that while children start primary school, being able to speak a language other than English, this language kind of fades away slowly as the school years progress, and they can slowly lose fluency. And it's because of the fewer opportunities to use the language. It's because obviously school work and school friendships take over. But then again, it's something that we feel is important to bear in mind, that language continues to develop, not only in the earliest part of life, in the early years, but children continue to develop language in primary and secondary school. And also, sometimes there are other issues and other, I suppose, barriers to achieving bilingualism, which is and this is the third example, is that sometimes children give up their mother tongue because they don't want to be seen as different. They're fearful of discrimination, or they may have been told by someone external to their family or a friend or someone who's important in their lives, like a teacher, that they should be prioritizing English. And that message in itself gives a hierarchy between languages. So shows that yes, there are languages that are more important, they should be more important to you, and English is one of them. Whatever other language you have, yes, it might be important to you, but please do X, Y, and Z. So of course, sometimes it's also important to bear in mind that the language we use around languages, the concepts we share, the opinions we share are very, very important. And they very much impact children's and young people's perception of the importance of their language. And the last point concerns parents. I'm obviously just running through some of the key things that I feel that we found are important. That parents may feel that they can't, when they can't pass their mother tongue, they may feel that they failed. And so many times in the one-to-one conversations that we have with parents, they tell us, I've done something wrong. I haven't achieved what I wanted to achieve. I'm not a good parent. I'm not good at this. I've failed. And so sometimes parents feel that they've done, by not passing their language to their children, they failed as parents. Sometimes they feel that they failed the expectations of their family of origin, because sometimes the lack of communication is caused by this missing piece at times. So there is a huge amount that we find of pressure sometimes on parents to feel that they should be able to pass on their language. They often face barriers that are personal barriers. Sometimes the barriers are posed from the outside world. So it's something that I think is important to be aware of. So mother tongues exists so that we can tackle these issues. We can have conversations around language, around bilingualism, around what challenges parents face. We often talk to teachers and we talk about the challenges teachers face when they want to celebrate bilingualism and multilingualism, which more and more teachers are doing in their day-to-day. So the way we respond to this need is primarily offering creative and multilingual workshops where children and their parents and carers come along and use all of the rich repertoire of languages. And these language activities are called language explorers. They're a whole program of workshops that at the moment take place in a couple of counties around Ireland. And I'll give you the link, and later on links will be shared with you around these activities that you can take part in for free. We also have training courses and talks, and we tend to talk to anybody who is important in the lives of children and young people, who can support them in thriving through any choice of language they might want to be using and maintaining. We sometimes talk to community groups, but sometimes we might find ourselves talking to a group of home visitors, really anybody who is important in sustaining the life of the family and the education of children. We also take part in any campaign that advocates for bilingualism, multilingualism. We carry out research, we collect data from all our programs, and we ask parents to give their input, and children as well. And we also have a bank of digital resources on bilingualism and multilingualism, which are open to anybody to explore and to subscribe to get articles, videos, and a wealth of other downloadable resources that can also help families and educators also on this journey. And finally, what you see in the little star is the Mother Tongues Festival, which is our yearly festival happening around February time, when it's International Mother Language Day. So it's only a few weeks away for people who are in Dublin. And we also, again, offer different workshops in different languages and shows, and there's music, there's dance. It's a celebration of all languages, and it's a celebration of the work that we do. And we really invite everybody to come along, because it's an opportunity for people to come and meet us and to meet other families who are also sharing the same journey. And so these are some of the figures from the last year. We involved more than 1,000 parents and children in our Language Explorers early years program. We trained and spoke to more than 600 teachers, education professionals, artists, and art workers. And through the Language Explorers, we also worked together with more than 100 artists to deliver our programs, to deliver the festival, to deliver especially the Language Explorers program. So we're always open to engaging with more people, extending our reach in new counties, in new areas that we haven't been in. So we really invite you to get in touch with us and ask us questions, or suggest ideas, and ask us to come to you if you wish to. And so just to conclude, there are some key messages that we like to share as mother tongues. And we know that the complexity of each family's situation is quite unique. And that's why we have services that are tailored to families. That's why we have one-to-one consultations, because we know that all families are different and the individual journey and the questions are very unique. to the circumstances. But we know some facts, such as living with more than one language for a child or an adult is very valuable. It's very beneficial. And we want people to keep understanding that message and keep, spreading also that message that living with two languages is the way a lot of people live in so many parts of the world, and Ireland being a multilingual country, but also officially a bilingual country, should really be a champion for this message. But also remember that heritage languages, which are the languages passed on from the parents to the next generation, to their children, can help children to connect with the extended family. And I say this because when a message is given to a parent or a child that the language of their heritage, the language of the grandparents is not so important, should be dropped, or should be dropped for reasons that are related to some difficulties in school or difficulties in language development, then by suppressing that language, we need to be aware that we're also suppressing all of those relationships that happen through that language. So a language is a lot more than just words or the ability to speak. It's relationship, it's bonds, it's links with family, and also potential for the future, for future relationships. And also the third message is that we know that parents find that passing on their language, maybe at the start they thought, oh, this is going to be so easy, but it takes time, it takes dedication, it takes a lot of trying, testing. Children's reactions vary. There are phases when children are so excited about this language, and then there are phases where they look like they would just not want to have anything to do with it. So parents need to be supported. When we do Language Explorers, you see a picture here. We work with parents and children together because the message needs to be spread with both, with parents, grandparents, with everyone, that parents need to be supported. Passing on a language in a context where maybe very few people speak it puts a lot of pressure on the parents. And as I said earlier, it could make them feel like they haven't achieved what they should have achieved, that they're failing at what they should be doing. So parents really need our kind words and support. And the last point is that all families are different. And that's why the work of Mother Tongues is so exciting all the time. You meet people who come from all walks of life. They make language choices based on the most amazing stories of people moving and coming back to Ireland and going or meeting someone from another part of the world, people going back to learn Irish and wanting to pass Irish, even if it's not their first language. So it's really, really interesting to hear such a variety of different experiences. But I think that parents should have enough information. That's why we exist as an organization. Parents should be informed, and they should be making choices that are informed by research, that are informed by their own experience, what they want to achieve, rather than some maybe set ideas that are old ideas or myths or incorrect information that sometimes gets disseminated. And so I hope that everybody who's here tonight will enjoy the talk that we're going to hear. There's a lot I'm here that I'm really keen to learn tonight as well. And I will also share the links to our to the programs that I mentioned a moment ago, so that you can come to the festival or check out our resources. But again, Mother Tongues is there for everybody to avail of. So thank you for your time.
Great, and thank you so much, Francesca. I'll take over. Okay, I'm going to share my slides as well. But first, I want to say thank you so much to everybody who's here tonight, and thank you so much to AsIAm and Mother Tongues for inviting me. I'm so excited to share my research with you guys. And while I prepare to share my slides, know that if I start coughing suddenly, do not be surprised. I was ill. I had a bad cold last week, but I'm okay now, but I might still cough a bit. Okay, so can everybody see my slides? I hope so. I'm going to assume that it's working. So yes, I'm Bérengère Digard. I'm a researcher at the University of Edinburgh, and these are my social media details. I've moved to Blue Sky, so this is where you can find me now, and these are all my funders that I'm also very grateful to for supporting my research. So I'm going to move you so that I can see my slide. There you go. So first, I assume most of you know a little bit about autism, but this is just a few words to make sure everybody's on track. So according to the latest estimates, we think there's about 1 to 2% of the world's population who is autistic. Of course, right now, these are the numbers mostly in childhood that we can observe, but there's also a lot of autistic adults. It's just that because of great difficulties in getting a diagnosis in adulthood, which is a whole other problem I'm not going to be talking about today. We currently have a much lower proportion of adults who know they're autistic, but we know that in human beings, the occurrence of autism is about 1 to 2%. And autism is, in very few words, a difference in how the way the brain develops and works. And so how it develops since before birth, since before we are born. This is the side note to say that vaccines do not cause autism. Autism starts before birth. And so from the beginning, the brain will start developing in a slightly different way to a neurotypical brain. And these slight differences will then show up in the world, how it is experienced in the real life, in terms of differences in the way somebody is going to make sense of sensory information like light or touch or sounds, but also how the brain is going to make sense of social information. And I'm going to be talking a bit more about social things later on. And also differences in something that we call executive skills, which is basically our ability to focus our attention on something or switch it between different things, or inhibit one type of information to stay focused on another type of information. All of this is called executive skills. And so autism is going to be mostly about differences in these different domains in the brain. As I said, autism starts before birth, and it is about the brain. So it is for the entire life. It is lifelong. Often a lot of the research is done with children, but autistic children do become autistic adults as well, and older adults as well. And yes, the research that we have is really mostly done on children, as I said. And even if it is not on children, it is on English-speaking, white, monolingual people. This is the huge majority of autism research. As you will have noticed, it's not the huge majority of human beings around the world. So most of the research really just focuses on a teeny tiny proportion of actual autistic people. Now, can I move slides? Yes. Now, a few words about bilingualism. And again, I assume most of you have an idea of what it is, but this is just so that you understand the definition that I use in my research. So we estimate about half the world's population is bilingual, which is enormous because most of the places that we hear about a lot and the big players on the international scenes are mostly very monolingual countries, or countries that like to think of themselves as being very monolingual. Well, actually, no, most people are bilingual around the world. And when I say bilingual, it is not just, often people think that it's about the people who grew up speaking 2 languages from birth and who are perfectly fluent in both languages. No, actually, these are quite rare. Most bilinguals have very different levels in their languages and have different levels of comfort and fluency in their languages, and they can have started learning their languages at different ages. Sometimes they can speak a language, but they can't really read or write it, and that still counts as bilingualism. To be bilingual, you just need to be able to understand more than one language, spoken or signed, at any level, and you can have started learning that language at any age. And bilingualism, just like all the things that we do in life, shapes the way the brain develops and works as well, especially in terms of how the brain makes sense of social information, again, and how it manages executive skills, again. So you'll see there is a bit of an overlap between autism and bilingualism in terms of brain stuff. And surprisingly, most of the research on bilingualism is done on neurotypical people, and the neurodivergent population has been mostly excluded from bilingualism research. So now if we put both together, autism and bilingualism, we actually see that, as Francesca said, actually, parents of autistic children, once they get the diagnosis, and also the teachers they might be speaking with, or the clinicians and doctors they might be speaking with, most of them are very concerned about potential delay or confusion caused by bilingualism. They really worry that raising the autistic child with 2 languages is just going to delay their development and confuse them. And that is even more the case for autistic children who don't speak much and who are minimally or nonverbal or have some form of language delay. And most of the parents would say that, well, at that point, all the therapies will be in the majority language. So, for example, English in the UK and potentially in Ireland as well. So just why bother with a second language? And then when we asked actually professionals specifically, they say that they genuinely don't know. It's not silly that they don't like bilingualism. It's just that they don't know at all what it would look like to help autistic bilingual children. So they just prefer to stop recommending bilingualism and just go for monolingualism because they know what it looks like. They know what monolingualism looks like, so that's what they go for. They keep on saying that there's just not enough research available for them to know what to say to these parents. So these has consequences. Just to promote monolingualism in otherwise bilingual families, it means that at least one, if not both parents, have to use their non-native language, which can really impact the parent-child communication and the interactions with, as Francesca said, the extended family, the religious and the cultural heritage. So this impact on parent-child communication is not for all families, but it can be for parents who feel less comfortable with their non-native language that they find themselves using when speaking to their child. And we know that for the development of children, it's better to use a language that is, it's better to raise children bilingually than to raise them with low, like not many words or not emotional words because the parent is just not comfortable enough. So this can have real consequences for the development of the child. And we have this situation, well, actually, admittedly, there was not a lot of research, but the research that existed showed that bilingualism there was no reason to believe that bilingualism would actually harm the development of autistic children, whether that's the broad social development or the executive skills development. There was just no sign that we should suspect a problem caused by bilingualism. And another thing, a very surprising effect of these monolingual recommendations is that this entire population of autistic bilinguals is completely overlooked and excluded to the point that you have no idea how many times I have been tagged in Twitter debates before I deleted my Twitter account a few days ago. I've been tagged in so many Twitter debates arguing that autistic bilinguals do not exist, that it's just not possible for autistic people to be bilingual, and that therefore if somebody is bilingual, they're lying about being autistic because it's just not possible, apparently. And so many times I was tagged into these chats and to say that, no, it's possible. They exist. I've met loads of them. So yes, it becomes a real problem when it becomes to the point that we doubt the existence of this population. So finally, why this whole thing matters? Why did I do this PhD? Because as Francesca said, it's not just about words. It's about someone's cultural heritage and their identity. It's about the language that parents and families will use to speak with one of their family members every single day for their entire life. And they deserve to make this decision while not being worried that it might potentially hurt their child. They need to know that it's okay, and they need to do this with support. So when all the clinicians were saying that there was no research available, I wanted to just, in a few words, tell you about what the research landscape looked like when I started my PhD in 2016. These were all the studies that existed. There was a couple of studies with parents saying that they didn't know what to do. A couple of studies with clinicians saying that there was no research available. 2 studies in adulthood with 1 or 2 polyglot savants, so autistic people who could speak like 20 plus languages. And then a few studies with autistic children, but like very broad, like measures with just autism profiles, broad language development measures, and broad mental skills measures. And all of this, which was the bulk of the research available, was 20 studies, which in research is equivalent to this. It's basically nothing. 20 papers on all of these very different topics, it's nothing at all. And this was the landscape for the beginning of my research. Of course, I could not address all of the big questions that we had, so I decided to focus on that thing that is at the crossroad between autism and bilingualism that I've been mentioning quite a bit, which is social cognition. So cognition is basically just to say things that happen in the brain, and social for, well, social information. So social cognition, it's basically what our brain does to spot social information in the world around us, to understand it and to figure out how to respond to this social information. And so for example, understanding thoughts and feelings of other people. Social cognition is like a big of an umbrella term, and there's loads and loads and loads of processes that are part of social cognition, and they all develop at different times in the development of the child. There's one big theory of autism that is that the key thing in autism is that autistic people cannot do social cognition at all, and that they need to be taught it like one would be taught maths or history, but that their brain does not learn how to do social cognition just implicitly, just by being like neurotypical people. So this is one theory. We'll see later if it looks like it's working with my research. And then there is one bilingualism theory that says that growing up bilingually actually boosts the development of social cognition in children implicitly. They just by being in a bilingual environment, children develop social cognition earlier. So this is one theory that exists as well, and we will see later how that fits with my findings. So basically, when I started my PhD, we had this situation that in neurotypical people, for studies with children, we found that bilingualism seemed to be good. In adulthood, though, it looked like nothing at all. There was not that many studies, and all of them found something different. Some found a positive effect, a negative effect, no effect whatsoever, because they all measured slightly different things, because there was just not enough studies out there to check each finding. And in autism, well, there was nothing at all. So that solved the problem. There was just no measure of social cognition in autistic people at all. And so it was time for me to start my research. So these are all of the studies that I'm going to be telling you about in more or less details. They're not in the order that I ran them, but they are in an order that makes sense to tell you about them. And then we're going to start with parents' experiences. And it's a study that we've run quite recently, actually, because we realized that in countries that are a majority monolingual, like the UK, for example, most of the policies for education and clinical support are monolingual. So bilingual families just receive very limited information or support regarding how to do things when you're a bilingual family. And in any case, therapies and education is not designed to support bilinguals. It's just a monolingual angle. So we were wondering what made parents choose to keep or not keep bilingualism with their autistic child. And so we did a long online questionnaire with 31 parents of autistic children. 27 of these 31 parents were raising their children bilingually, though 12 of them said that after receiving the diagnosis for their child, they did question for a while whether they would keep bilingualism or not. And basically, this is what the parents said. Like the top 3 reasons to keep bilingualism really map onto what Francesca was saying earlier, that communicating with the family, both within and out with the home, so the extended family, was the main reason to keep bilingualism. But also communicating with people in the community. And that can be both in the community if they live in a community that is rather with the same cultural background as they are, but also on the contrary, if they are in a community that is very monolingual, it will be then focusing on monolingualism. So this can really go both ways. So that's why I wanted to point it out. For example, some parents said, we gave up on using our language to help my child develop communication in English, the language where we live. And so this was one of the things that made them question. But also another important thing, as I said, was that they wanted their child to be able to join in on religious and cultural activities that were important to them and to their cultural heritage. We asked them also about the opinion of the people around them. And again, as Francesca said, the families were very supportive to maintain the heritage language, while clinicians either had no opinion or were on paper very supportive, but did not actually provide any practical information or support. They just said, it sounds great, and you figure it out. And same for teachers, mostly very supportive, but only in principle, or no opinion whatsoever, letting the parents fend for themselves and figure it out on their own. And when they looked for information, they said that mostly the internet is where they went to for information. So events like tonight, for example, but also some support groups. And we see again here, as Francesca was saying, the importance of the community around them and people who go through the same experiences as them. And finally, clinicians, for those who had clinicians who were informed on these topics. So these are other quotes as well, so that are quite sad. So for example, one said that the speech and language therapist suggested that our child could not learn the language, so we should just stick with one language. And another parent said, I have read leaflets that bilingualism won't confuse him, but to me, it already seems that English alone confuses him. And his speech and language therapist didn't know much about bilingualism and had no advice. So what do parents do in these situations? That even if the best intentions in the world, the clinicians and the support network who are supposed to be here to help them don't know. So this made things very difficult for them. So what we found here, as in a few words, is that there was a strong link between the family and the community relationships and the need for bilingualism. Importantly, only 1/3 of parents received information from professionals, which is where they would go to first for practical advice, and this is a real problem. And they all reported that a large proportion of professionals just provided no opinion or support whatsoever to the parents when asked. And this is not a situation that we want to be in, because we don't want these parents to be left stranded and fending for themselves. For those who are really keen on reading scientific papers, this is the paper where we presented our findings. So then now I'm going to tell you about one of our studies that we did in childhood, though this is a study that my colleague Rachel Davis did. So I'm going to just quickly present her findings, but it makes more sense in the story that I'm telling you. So she researched the mental development of children. She had 51 autistic and 54 neurotypical children with different levels of bilingualism. Many studies like to do to change bilingualism into a binary thing with bilinguals versus monolinguals, but it doesn't really make much sense because, as I said at the beginning, there's so many different ways to be bilingual, being bilingual is not a binary thing that you are or you're not. It's more complicated than that. And so she used that approach of using bilingualism as something that was continuous with a lot of diversity within it. And she used loads of parents' reports and questionnaires, as well as directly measuring what the children could do in terms of social cognition, on language, and executive function. And she found mostly no differences due to bilingualism, which is, in our realm, a positive finding. All scientists want to find a positive effect of what they do. In the work we do, we're happy with just showing that bilingualism is not bad. She found no negative effects of being more bilingual than being less bilingual. And that is a very important finding. And she even found some potential benefits in terms of social and executive skills, though the sample at just 50 children, it was just way too little to be really able to tell if these benefits are real or not. But at least definitely no negative effects whatsoever on the mental development of the children. And these are the two papers that where she presented these findings, and you'll find them on the slides that I will be sharing with you afterwards as well. And this is how we move on to my PhD research. You will remember there was absolutely nothing available when I started my PhD in 2016. So at the start, I decided to look at autistic people's social habits working in adulthood. Because if you looked at the research available, you had only two types of autistic bilinguals presented in research. So that was autistic bilingual children who had been raised bilingually from birth, and adults who were polyglot savants speaking 20 languages. And as I didn't know anybody who would fit in these categories. You know that from neurotypical people, most bilingual people are not in these categories. There's so much more diversity to being bilingual. And this diversity was not represented at all in research for autistic people. And so my first question was, who are autistic bilingual people? What do they look like? What is their language journey? And then focusing on the social realm, I was wondering as well if being bilingual had shaped their social life. And if so, how? What was it about bilingualism that had shaped their social life? And so for this, I designed a big online questionnaire, and I'm very grateful to the 89 monolingual, 98 bilingual, and 110 multilingual adults from all around the world who did my PhD research. It was my first study, and all of these people are about 200 more than what I was expecting. So I'm very grateful. And what I found was that any bilingual journey can be that of a neurotypical person or an autistic person. There is the exact same diversity in bilingual profile and bilingual journeys in autism as there is in typical development. And I also found that the more they knew languages, the higher they rated themselves, their social life quality. So of course, it doesn't mean that if you speak 10 languages, you're much happier than somebody who only speaks 3, but more than monolinguals versus bilinguals versus 3 or more languages, the people with more languages were happier with their social life. And then I decided to focus on what's going on in the mind of autistic bilingual people. I wanted to know whether indeed bilingualism could influence social cognition in autistic adults as it does in neurotypical children. I wanted to figure that one out. However, as I said, bilingualism, it's not just bilingualism, it's all of these different things. It's the number of languages you know, how proficient you are in these languages, when you started acquiring these languages, how much you switch between those languages. Because we know that in the brain, if you're somebody who has one language at home and one language outside the home, it's very different for your brain that if you speak these two languages, completely mixing them all the time, every single day. And so bilingualism is much more complicated than just the one thing. And same for social cognition. It's actually loads of different processes, as I said at the beginning. And I specifically looked at processes that are called cognitive social cognition and perspective taking, which is basically thinking that I think you think something, and affective perspective taking, which is about feelings and not thoughts. So I think she feels something. And this is what I decided to focus on. And turns out, even in neurotypical people, I told you earlier, all the findings were all over the place because all the studies looked at different kinds of social cognition. That's why none of them agreed with each other. And so I wanted to look at all of them at the same time. So my question was not a straight line at all and looked a little bit more like this. And you will remember, as I said, in neurotypical people, even it was not clear at all what this relationship was like. So basically, I did both. I tried to answer this question in neurotypical people and in autistic people. So this was most of my PhD, and it was very complicated. And I tried to answer this question thanks to 39 autistic people and 90 adults and 96 neurotypical adults. And again, all kinds of bilinguals. I took everybody in. And I used loads and loads of different measures of social cognition. And this is what I found. I found that for both neurotypical and autistic adults, there was indeed an effect of being bilingual on social cognition. And this effect was driven by when they had started to learn their second language. All else considered equal, their executive skills considered equal, their IQ considered equal, and all of the other things about bilingualism considered equal, the younger they had learned their second language, the better they were doing on a measure of cognitive perspective taking. So understanding what other people think, not what they feel, but what they think. And I found this exact same relationship in both neurotypical and autistic people. So it showed that early bilingualism, before even learning how to speak, just being exposed to it from a very, very young age, shaped the development of social cognition in autistic people, just as it did in neurotypical people. And it could do this in a long-lasting way, because I was working here with adults, not with children. So I was seeing an effect of something that they had experienced in early childhood, which was really, really exciting. So of course, this now would need to be replicated, but so far it seems to be pretty robust in everything that I've tried to verify that it was indeed working. So what it means is that bilingualism is not just not bad. As Rachel found in her studies with children, it actually is even good for some things. There are some real bilingualism benefits for some things. And if we go back to our theories that I told you at the beginning, the theory that bilingualism, just being surrounded by languages, could boost the development of social cognition just by being implicitly, and indeed my findings do support that. However, the theory, the autism theory, that autistic people simply cannot do social cognition and need to be taught it, no, my findings show that it's not the case, because the autistic people in my study had the benefit of bilingualism starting from before they even learned how to speak. So they were not taught how to do social cognition at that age. They just understood it just by being in a more bilingual environment. And this is very interesting it means that my findings support these new ways of understanding autism and the social skills of autistic people. And just to make sure, I decided to look at what's going on inside the brain of autistic and neurotypical as well. And so I wanted to see this relationship, this effect of growing up with several languages compared to not growing up with several languages, also existed in the brain. And so I'm really grateful to the 17 autistic people who, and 15 neurotypical people who did my MRI study. And this time they were grouped in early versus late bilinguals, but otherwise same IQ, same proficiency in their languages, same experiences of switching languages, all the same, except that some had learned their second language before the age of 5 and other after the age of 5. And then they did some really boring social cognition games in an MRI. And what I found is that actually there were brain activity differences between the early and the late bilinguals during the same process. And interestingly, it was again a similar influence of early bilingualism in neurotypical and autistic people. And so that means that for a developing brain, it doesn't matter whether it's an autistic or a neurotypical brain, it benefits the exact same from growing up with two languages, at least when it comes to developing social cognitive processes. And all of this is really nice. I mean, I'm a brain scientist, so I love looking at the brain, but it's more important to look, I think, at real life, the people's real daily life. And so this is another study that I ran. When I asked the people from the very first study, the online questionnaire about social life quality, I asked them to tell me what it was like for them as an autistic person to be bilingual and what it was like for them as a bilingual person to be autistic. And this is what they talked about. They talked about how being autistic had influenced how they were able to learn languages, both as an advantage and as a disadvantage. Autism influences both ways. They talked about a feeling of self-efficacy, especially in terms of being better able to understand themselves and being more confident in their own skills. So for example, somebody said that each language I know allows me to better express specific thoughts and emotions. And it is great to be able to communicate online with people about ourselves and our autism. It makes you feel less alone. And I think this is a really important thing, especially for people who have a native language where there's not that much available on autism. So being able to speak another language allows them to connect with people all around the world. They talked a lot about all of the opportunities brought by languages in terms of entertainment and leisure, but also travel, education, and employment. Just like for anybody, really, everybody benefits from these things when it comes to bilingualism, and it's true for autistic people as well. And of course, they also talked about the relationships that they were able to create or maintain thanks to their languages, especially with family or friendship. And just to make sure that these were true legit findings, we also did that with the second group who did the research for me, the cognitive research, and we asked them similar questions, and they talked about the same thing, about how being bilingual had helped them in terms of communicating and expressing themselves and understanding other perspectives. Again, a whole lot of opportunities and benefits that they were able to get thanks to being bilingual. Again, being able to better understand themselves, their own skills, and their own experience of autism, but also some things that were that facilitated or challenged their language learning. It was really interesting to see, for example, the role of the environments or the language domains and competencies. So, for example, vocabulary or conjugation or oral expression. All of these things were listed both as things that went really well for some people and things that went really poorly for some people. Or like, for example, learning in school. For some people, it was great. For other people, it was a real challenge. So it was interesting to see how the huge diversity in language learning experiences amongst autistic bilingual people. And I really love that quote that somebody gave us, the languages that you know draw the boundaries of your world. And I think this is beautiful and very, very true, that being able to have these languages open doors for them. And then we did another study because once we start constantly thinking about people's real life, we also have to take into account things that Francesca did mention as well, in terms of, for example, stigma of being a minority, with loads of people sometimes not wanting to speak their heritage language just to try and like blend in more. And this is when we then move into thinking about the concept of masking, putting on a mask. It is something that autistic people often have to do and hide the fact that they're autistic and try and pretend in the way they behave that they are not autistic. It's also called camouflaging. And this is a way to try and make it through the stigma of being autistic. And then you can, but it can also be experienced to fight off the stigma of being any minority. And And so it's also applicable for the stigma of being bilingual or from a cultural minority. And so masking, it's using these different strategies to try and pretend that they're not who they are, but it is very detrimental to mental health. It's very exhausting to constantly monitor how you're behaving, or in terms of languages, to force yourself to not use a language or words that you would like to use, or expressions or an accent or something like this. But also constantly lying about who you are and masking who you are, beyond being very exhausting. It's also, it can cause anxiety, it can be involved in depression and things like this. It's not a positive thing, and people rely on masking as a way to make it through the day, not by it doesn't make anybody happy, really. And when looking at this shared experience of masking being autistic and being bilingual, we of course had to focus on a subgroup because it was a big topic. So we decided to focus on the experiences of students, autistic bilingual students in monolingual neurotypical university environment. And for this, we interviewed 7 autistic bilingual university students, both undergraduate and postgraduate students. And this is what they talked about how being autistic and bilingual had helped them to embrace their diversity and their uniqueness. For example, somebody said that I want to embrace the diversity because I am diverse, and I think language is a great way for diversity. People talked about how there had been some challenges in accepting their autistic identity, and also that, on the contrary, they had completely just like weakened their own bilingual identity. They were more worried about being autistic than being bilingual, and completely just forgot and removed the fact that they were bilingual or that they worked from a cultural minority. For example, somebody saying, since starting uni and making more friends that have all sorts of international upbringing, it's been easier to embrace bilingualism, while before that at school, being the only bilingual person at school made it very difficult to embrace being bilingual. Other people also talked about the new opportunities given by being bilingual. For example, somebody saying that language is a weapon and a very powerful tool, and I think this is always a very important message to keep in mind. Of course, again, many people talked about all of the close relationships that they were able to get through being bilingual. But also, finally, they talked about difficulties connecting with people in monolingual Britain. If somebody, for example, saying that they tried to make themselves whiter and avoid this identity entirely. And we see here that it is therefore a big problem for autistic bilingual people when you already have to navigate being autistic in a neurotypical world that is not very friendly to autistic people, and you also are from a cultural or language minority. Many of them just removed one of the two, and being bilingual was the one who just left. So it was all nice to have all of these findings that were slightly depressing sometimes, but always very important to point out. And we wanted to bring them into the real world. And when I say we, I'm talking about the work that I did with my colleague, Rachel Davis. We saw that parents and professionals clearly did not know what to do, did not know where to go to find information. And we decided that we would be the people giving them the information. So we created this new website, the autismandbilingualism.com, very to the point, and that gathers loads of resources that we've been creating for the past several years now to help people. So we have information for families. So there is a really cute video right here that you can find on the website. There's resources for parents, text-based resources in all of these languages. Some of them translated by volunteers from the community who translated them for us. For the video right now, we have one version, only English, has been released online, but we have two other versions as well. Polish and Arabic have been already recorded, done by people who are either autistic themselves or family members of autistic people. Well, yeah, there you go. You can't look at the video. But we also have resources for clinicians and educators specifically. So we have some webinars for clinicians, webinars for educators, as well as professional guidelines. For example, the clinical guidelines are endorsed by the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists. All of these resources were created with clinicians and teachers and bilingual parents of autistic people and autistic bilingual people themselves. All of them were, and they're the ones who decided what should go in and how it should be presented. And we just put them in a nice way available online. There you go. You won't see that either. We also, just to make sure that it worked, we did recently a little study to see whether our website was actually useful, because we didn't want to just think, well, that's wonderful, just like pat on our back, we did a very good job creating this website, not wondering whether it actually works. No, we did check that it would work. So we did another online survey with different parts to the survey, one that they had to complete before, just after, and 1 month after visiting the Autism and Bilingualism Hub. And we have data from parents as well, but here with the analysis that we've done already, we have data from 21 clinicians and 23 educators. Before seeing the hub, they talked about the fact that some of them, their negative views or their lack of opinion was clearly mostly due to the fact that they had no knowledge or resources, and they were not comfortable advising parents in these conditions. They were also particularly worried about children with minimal to no speech. But the website indeed really helped, gave them higher understanding and higher confidence in helping parents and advising best practice to parents. So we were very happy that our website actually works. And that's the end for me. I've been talking for ages. The conclusions are that bilingualism is not bad for autistic people. It's not bad for anybody. It's not bad for autistic people either. And it even has some real life benefits, just like for anybody, really. We know as well that parents need practical recommendations from professionals, and that we know now that professionals do benefit from our one-stop shop website. This is the QR code to go to the website, with accessible information already prepared and like shortened and simplified, made more accessible for them and for parents directly. And that's it. Thank you so much to all of you. And these are two things that I want to recommend, because I've been talking and it's been really exciting, but I think it's better to just hear about this topic from the point of view of autistic bilingual people themselves. So this is a book by Daniel Tammet, who is multilingual and autistic. And I did an episode on the Much Language Search Dog podcast with a friend of mine who's autistic bilingual as well. And we had a great conversation. And so I really recommend that if you're interested in this topic, you go and listen to them. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Okay, so we're going to open it up to questions now. If anyone would like to pop in a question in the Q&A or the chat. And if this has brought up any larger questions, you can also feel free to call into the information line. You don't need to raise your hand to ask a question. You can just type it in the chat if you want. Got a few hands up. People are being more polite than they need to be.
I hope I did not throw too many complicated concepts. Yeah, I'm happy. I'm relieved that there are some questions, really.
Mm.
Fixed.
I might actually allow the people who have their hands up to talk rather than put it in chat if
Sure.
that's helpful.
No worries. Yeah, no worries.
So the first one we have is from Anne. I'm going to let you talk. Okay. You should be able to talk now, Anne.
You're muted. Anne.
Okay.
Oh, you're unmuted. Yeah.
Okay, I'll just say that probably the reason people are putting up their hands is because the chat is disabled,
Oh my
and so
gosh.
is the Q&A.
Oh my gosh. I'm sorry, I did not know.
Yeah, it says the host has disabled it. The Q&A in the chat.
Chat with everyone. Okay. Okay, there we go. I'm sorry about that. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. Okay, so now the chat is open and anyone should be able to put.
Should I still ask a question? Should I write it
Yes,
in
of
the
course.
chat? Okay. I was wondering, Bérengère, thank you very, very much. Really interesting, and I'm going to recommend your work to a lot of my colleagues. I work in Sweden, and I work with multilingual tutors and mother tongue teachers, and both of those groups of teachers or tutors meet a lot of neurodivergent students, and they have asked me many, many times, how can we think about these students? So heaps of valuable information for them. But my question was about your participants in the studies. Did they all have English in their repertoire, or did you speak your
Sorry, because there's an echo, so I can't always understand you perfectly.
Did your participants always have English in their multilingual repertoire, or did you have participants who spoke, for example, Swedish and Swahili?
So all of them spoke English because, but not necessarily as a native language, because I did this study in the UK. So all of them had enough of an English skill to take part in the study. They were not necessarily perfectly fluent and comfortable, but they had enough of it to do the study.
Thanks for that. I think it would be interesting to replicate some of your studies in countries as well, where perhaps it's hard to find countries where English isn't dominant, but yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. So I think in my study, because I mean, many bilingualism studies have set languages. So, like for example, in the US, that would be often English, Spanish, for example. I did the study with autistic people in the UK. I could not be that picky, so I really took everybody in. So I had like 60 languages in my study.
Oh, wow.
I'm barely exaggerating, and so there was a lot of diversity, but indeed all of them had at least a little bit of English through just living in the UK at the time of the study. But yeah, replicating that without this English, big weight of English would be very interesting.
Just thinking of the connecting with the online community, which is easier because the online community in English is so big. But thank you. I'll let someone else speak now.
No worries. Thank you. For Jackie, yes, I will send a copy of the slides to AsIAm, and so you'll have them with all the things in there. And the link to the research studies, yes, I can even actually add the PDFs directly, because for people who are not researchers, and even actually researchers, depending on the institutions, you don't have access to papers for free. Never pay for a paper for free. Email the researchers. They'll just be delighted that somebody cares about their work, and they will be emailing you their paper for free. So I will also add the papers, because I'm just excited for people to read my work, really.
Okay.
And Yana, I'm very happy. I'm very proud of your son who speaks all of these languages.
Okay. I've never had a webinar where people are so excited to read the studies behind it.
Scientific papers.
Okay, so I'll be putting together a follow-up email with the slides from Francesca and Bérengère. And I guess I'll have to put together all of Bérengère's research as well, so people can go through it at their own time, because there seems to be such an interest in it. Ooh, Mongolian.
Yes.
Wow. And I will get that email out to everyone either tomorrow or the day after. But if you have any more in-depth questions that you'd like to send into the information line, I could.
Anyway, any that you would recommend to talk to parents that would include all any SNI? What
I think
does
that might be SNL, speech and language.
oh, that's a different acronym in Ireland compared to the UK. Okay.
No, I usually see SLT as well.
Okay. I would not know, because usually SLTs are, at least in the UK, the link is made through the NHS and just the local authority. What I can say is that more and more SLTs are informed on the topic.
Yeah.
Again, it depends where you are. We did notice that the more people are in big cities, the more they're actually up to date with this, while people who are more in rural part of the world where they meet fewer bilinguals, they're less up to date with this. And that's a real problem. The discrepancy in practices across in a single country is a real problem, especially here, for example, in Scotland. The situation between the Central Belt and the Highlands and the islands, the situation is getting better, and usually what I noticed is that SLTs, even the ones who don't know, are always really keen to learn about this. So if you have been linked with an SLT who is not aware of that, do feel free to share the website with them, because on the website that we've made, there are sections that we made with SLTs for SLTs that really tackle the doubts that they have and the questions that they have. So far from what we've heard, it was a good way to even get SLTs who were not aware on board. Any advice to help them see the benefits of bilingualism? Ultimately, I would always say that it's important to not force a child to be bilingual if they show not only no interest or no enjoyment, but that if they really just recoil from it, it's a possibility. I always want to put that out there. However, if a child shows either no interest one way or another, it's always good to at least put a little bit of it in. And if the child doesn't speak, it's completely fine. We have loads of testimonies of non-speaking children who, apart from the fact that they don't speak, behave just like any other bilingual child. And we're currently running a pilot study to try and actually include these children in research. So far, there's no research with these children because we don't have ways to measure things with these children. So we're trying to work on this. It's very difficult. But as a way to include, I mean, for the parents to see the benefits of bilingualism, I would say always that it's unfair to remove access to something just on the basis that they're autistic. It doesn't make sense. They have a right to have access to their Romanian heritage, and later on they'll see if they want to continue that or not. But it's unfair to remove that from them. In the UN regulations for children, yeah, exactly, the rights of children. Heritage, access to heritage, language and culture is one of the protected rights of children, regardless of their neurotype. So providing this space for the child to engage is a good way. So we had people who would just not raise their child with both the languages, but provide cartoons on TVs or books or songs in the heritage language, just to keep this as at least the exposure would be there. And that is already really good, because ultimately we can't always just do the like beautiful, perfectly balanced situation, but just songs and language and cartoons, it's already really good.
Yeah. Would you have any suggestions on that, Francesca, of how non-family members can promote bilingualism?
Yeah, definitely. As I said earlier, just sharing the positive message. So, first of all, being on board, which might take some awareness development, awareness raising. But also then once the family members are on board, irrespectively of what languages they may speak or not, or some family members may not understand one of the languages. But again, showing a little bit of positivity, of openness, goes a very long way, because it kind of gives a sense of security and a sense of, yes, this can be done. And I feel fear is one of the themes that tend to come up a lot in our, fear of making mistakes, or fear of what is going to happen to my child or my niece or my nephew. And when you have fear, what do? You just ask around. You ask to as many people as you can and try to find the best possible solution to your problem. And so it is ideal when family members are also as well informed as a teacher or a speech and language therapist, so that everybody's on the same page and the messages we're sharing are common messages instead of being mixed messages, where mixed messages cause more uncertainty and more fear around what might be the future. So definitely, this is one of the things that we do with our work, just try to spread information and also allow parents to find themselves having those conversations in groups where they meet other families and they kind of realize, oh, it's not just me. There's plenty of others who are going through the same ups and downs at the moment. And sometimes we find that it's very nice when parents of older children can share stories, because the ones with the little children, they're very young children, kind of go, oh, there is a trajectory there. There is something maybe I didn't expect. But here is a story that kind of gives me a sense of what's coming ahead.
And yeah, we saw the same thing with the importance of like messages coming from all places. So that's why in the website we tackled like all of these different angles as well, just because parents who get conflicting information are more confused and more lost than without any information, really. And another thing as well that I like to point out is that when supporting parents, it's also important to understand where they're coming from and for their own ways they deal with bilingualism. And I'm thinking this mostly also of people who might just be also themselves first generation immigrants. And my personal experience of being the daughter of an immigrant, I know, for example, my mother did not raise us in Spanish because she was remembering what it was like to not be good enough at French, and therefore hammered in the French because she had her own background and relationship to being bilingual and learning a language and being a minority language speaker. So supporting the whole family in this is, I think, also very important. It's interesting because when we touched in languages, again, as we both said, it's never just language that we're talking about. There is a lot that comes with it. And especially in the sociopolitical situations that most countries are at the moment, being a non-native speaker of the majority language does come with quite a few things that have to be navigated as well.
Okay, I think. Oh. Getting distracted by everyone's stories.
Thank you, Katarzyna. If you were in Edinburgh, I would bring you to my study, but I guess you're not in Edinburgh. So if you know parents of autistic bilingual non-speaking children in Edinburgh, please send them my way.
Or if anyone would like to take a trip to Edinburgh for the bank holiday weekend.
Exactly.
So I think I'm going to have to end it there. Yeah. We've gone a little bit over, but the recording will, oh no, it's always the ones that people are interested in that go over. But the recording will be up tomorrow, and I will attempt to get the email with all of the research out tomorrow. And I'd just like to thank Francesca and Bérengère for sharing all of their knowledge and research. And I hope that everyone who has the chance to be in Dublin for the Mother Tongues Festival gets the chance to check it out. Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Have a good night.